Hi, everybody. Good evening, and welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy, and today is Thursday, November 17th, 2022. So, after approximately 2 years away, we're really happy to be relaunching our young adult programming. And tonight, I'm going to share with you some old ideas about our programming, and a whole bunch of new things. But before I get into that, I want to make a special announcement. On January 20th next year, 2023, so just about 2 months away, I'm going to be hosting a masterclass on attachment-based therapy. So I've had many requests for people that aren't parents necessarily or aren't looking for their own therapeutic experience, but want therapeutic training. So we decided to open up this class. You can email intensives@evoketherapy.com for questions. You can also go to the link for those of you watching live on the screen and look at our professional programming. I'll be talking about, among other things, talking about attachment-based therapy, talking about countertransference and transference, talking about really what I call the method of psychotherapy, not just understanding what attachment looks like, healthy, secure attachment versus ambivalent or avoidant attachment, but really understanding the method that goes into healing based on attachment theory. So I'm looking really forward to that. So let's begin with the content for today. I want to start with this quote by Marie Louise von Franz that says, Jung said that to be in a situation where there is no way out or to be in conflict where there is no solution is the classical beginning of the process of individuation. Historically, we've talked about young adults in therapy and we've used the phrase failure to launch. And what we don't like about that phrase now, why we don't use that in the treatment world now, is because it tends to pathologize, right? It labels what young adults are up against as, by definition, a pathology, that something's wrong with them. The process of moving from childhood to adulthood is a very difficult task to navigate, and there are certain struggles, and everything is moving. The very ground, metaphorically, is moving beneath your feet. So it's expected that there are going to be some challenges. There's expected some things are going to fall apart. It's suspected that old ways of coping are going to fail. Old ways of operating, even within the family system, are no longer going to serve the purpose that they once served. So we think about it now in terms of emerging adulthood, and we look at it much more compassionately, much more non-judgmentally, to understand what young adults are navigating. I will say this clearly: when we talk about development, specifically brain development and maturation, brain scientists will talk about, those who study the brain will talk about that the adolescent brain goes from about 13 to around 25. So before we are really fully in our adult brain, physiologically, we're still working with, in some ways, some limited capacities. So the maturing process is not just environmental or affected by environment, but it's also organic. It's determined to some extent by how quickly our brain develops. Female brains tend to develop a little bit earlier, maybe a year or two on average, and male brains take a little bit longer. I'm sure a lot of folks out there are going to be happy to have that little tidbit for themselves. Speaking developmentally, in this process of emerging young adults, emerging adults clarify their identities by learning more about themselves and their wants. The entire stage of emerging adulthood is an opportunity for self-exploration because young people are more independent from parental control than they were as adolescents. At the same time, they have not yet accepted the typical commitments of adulthood. One of the things that's helped me as a father of now two not so young adults and one emerging adult and one adolescent, one of the things that has helped me to support them is to understand that this is a messy period, and that part of what's central to the developmental task of children is to separate. So sometimes overt rejection of parents, that distance, not wanting to hug, not wanting to be the child anymore in the relationship, which for a parent really does involve some kind of loss and grief. But when it gets reframed as a necessary task for the child to develop its own, his or her or their own sense of identity, what that does for me as a father is that allows me to lean into that separation. that otherwise would be extraordinarily painful, but to lean into it and to accept that part of my gift is to allow for my child's separation, to allow for the distance. I've told the story and won't retell it here again this evening, but I told the story about my young adult child that was moving away at around the age of 20, and how I was expressing during a therapy session some grief, and my therapist reminded me, somewhat playfully, but also very, very honestly, that your son needs to get as far away from you as he can. That's part of his individuation task. And I think that being at Evoke's program, being at Evoke's wilderness therapy program, provides parents and children this kind of physical boundary, this separation that mirrors the psychological task that is being asked of the child and the parents. Sometimes we think of in systems and family systems theories that one of the challenges from the parent side of things that can really press against our capacity is our letting go of that connection. I remember when my second child moved away, I thought I'd kind of covered the ground with my first child. They're only about 20 months apart. But when my second child was going away to college, I can remember being overwhelmed with the grief of it, with the loss of it. I remember thinking very, very consciously, this seems ridiculous to me. And this was a good thing. Nothing was going sideways with my daughter at the time, but it was still a painful loss. One minute I was aware of her whereabouts. We were accountable to each other for dinner times and other things that were family focused. And the next minute she was off by herself, not needing me, not relying on me. And what I loved about her experience, along with my sons, my oldest, is that part of what they needed was to have that distance, to experiment, to fail, to play around with their sense of self. I've shared other times that my 20-year-old son, who's now at college, that I became so intrigued by the university that he was attending that I thought about applying to it and teaching there, moving back to New York State. But we all made an agreement as a family, very, very consciously, that I was going to wait until he graduated from the program, because part of what he needs is that distance. So sometimes the challenge for us is to know that we need to let them kind of make their way. And when home therapists, when psychotherapists at home, and this is, I've heard this for the past 25 years, they'll encourage parents at times to give the child some more rope, some more leeway, some more freedom. And I think what parents hear when that suggestion is made by a therapist, that if the parent does that, that everything will go well, when in fact it doesn't go well. Oftentimes, sometimes the child absolutely trips and stumbles and metaphorically skins their knee. But what's great about this time, this individuation and separation, is that when the child learns out in the world that all of the limits and the boundaries and the consequences that are happening to them aren't necessarily about the parent anymore, they recognize, they begin to own that this is their life now. And I've been saying this a lot over the past couple of months. It's an idea or a theme that has come to me, that at the end of the day, even from a very young age, in a spiritual and emotional sense, it's critical to remember that it is our child's life for them to live. And while, especially when they're young or when they're living in our home, we are obligated to have to develop boundaries and limits within which we can feel safe and responsible as a parent. That goes almost without saying, but that part of the freedom is allowing them to make mistakes, because unfortunately, as all of you know, the most prominent lessons of our life, the most common lessons in our life, come through the mistakes that we made, through the missteps that we have. So it's developmentally appropriate for things to stop and start and fail and struggle. That's even in with a child that's, we would say, is behaving, operating, developing within relative norms in society, mainstream society. Even with those children, these kinds of setbacks and sideways detours are part of the process. Something I said in the last broadcast or two that somebody else brought to my attention. This idea and concept. Remember this for children and for parents. Remember this for all of your work, that the trigger is not in the way. The trigger is the way. And what I mean by that, what people who teach that mean by that is that's where the awareness comes. That's where the lesson comes. And as I've also said many times in the past couple of months, that when the parent recognizes and realizes the truth that the child is here to teach us, the child is the teacher, not us, then everything, our perspective, our energy completely shifts. Young adulthood is an age of instability. Exploration and shifting choices make the stage of emerging adulthood exceptionally unstable. This instability is best illustrated by how often emerging adults move from one residence to another. While emerging adults are aware that they need a plan for the future, this plan is subject to numerous revisions. Each revision is evidence that they have learned something new about themselves and are one step closer to identifying the kind of future they want. In emerging adulthood, instability replaces the anxiety of adolescence as a new source of disruption and stress. I love how simple it is to realize that the amount of times that young adults move compared to us older adults or our young children who live with us is a pretty high. There's a pretty big difference between how much they move and how much we move. I know for myself when I'm traveling that after a while it becomes pretty unsettling not to have something that I call home. Just this week, earlier this week, I had the opportunity to travel and to participate in a wonderful teaching experience right outside of Detroit, Michigan. And I can remember coming home and feeling how safe, how built for myself my home was. And young adults are living in a much more unstable place. I wanted to share one other concept I've been thinking about this week as it relates to this instability. I wrote about this earlier this week on my social media. This idea that oftentimes we talk about finding out who we are, finding our truth, what we like, what we want, what we want to do for our lives. We often ask adolescents, even younger children sometimes, but for sure young adults, what do you want to become? And we're of course talking about what they want to become in terms of their career, their vocation. Um, and oftentimes they don't have the answer, but there's pressure from the very question that they should know the answer. And for some people, I feel like one of the lucky ones. My first semester of my first year in college, it became clear to me after one class in child psychology what I would be doing generally for the rest of my life. So sometimes our truth comes to us in a grand vision with some of the details, filled in. But for most of us, or for at least many of us, the truth comes very, very slowly, bit by bit, day by day, even minute by minute. And what we think of ourselves at Evoke as, we think of ourselves as guides. Even for young adults, I even think that it's more of a mentoring program in many ways than a psychotherapy program. Don't get me wrong. Our therapists are incredibly clinically sophisticated. In fact, that is probably the most underrated aspect of wilderness therapy in general. But I think that there tends to be more of a mentoring feel, especially with the field guides and the clients, the young adult clients. But really, what we're helping them to do is just find the next truth. What do you want right now? What are you feeling right now? What's the next small choice that you need to make? And I love the a book I read a couple of years ago that was actually recommended by Oprah Winfrey on her book club called The Lion Tracker's Guide to Life, where it was the real story of a day in the life of a lion tracker master and his apprentice. They would go out in the morning and find the lions and where they had eaten the night before, get back into camp and tell all the tour guides where the lion pride was so they could go out and drive right to them and find them. But one of the things that they talk about in this is this idea that the lion tracker has, that we don't know where we're going, but we know how to get there. This idea of finding the first tracks, they call them. the next step. And if you lose your way, you're looking again for the next first tracks. So in a lot of ways, we're helping young people kind of track their way to their life, to their expansive and beautiful life, and we're doing it beside them. Maybe even much more so than the way that I think about it with adolescents. Emerging adulthood is an age of self-focus. Emerging adulthood is one of the most self-focused ages of life. There are few daily obligations and commitments to others. Most emerging adults will eventually commit to careers and relationships, but first they want to focus on personal goals and self-development. By focusing on their own lives, emerging adults develop skills for daily living, gain a better understanding of who they are and what they want, and lay the foundation for their adult lives. Self-focus will eventually lead to sufficiency. Maybe one of the things I harp on is, as much as any principle in therapy and psychology and psychotherapy, is this idea that selfishness isn't selfish. Selfishness is what we get told by people when we displease them, when we're doing what they think is the wrong thing, or when we're not attending to them. But the healthy self-focus that we're talking about, that can look and sound like selfishness when compared to other stages in life, is perfectly appropriate, even something that is to aspire to. You have to find out what feeds your soul. You have to differentiate from peers, differentiate from parents, for sure, and from other authority figures, and find out what you like and what you believe. So when a young adult client says to me, what's in it for me? My thought is, that's the very best answer you could ask in therapy. Because if I have some wisdom, any wisdom at all to share with you, I hope, and you better hope, that somehow it's going to benefit you. As I've always said to the clients, if smoking crack worked, I would teach you how to do it. And while it works for a moment, for a very short period of time, the consequences, of course, are dire, both physically, spiritually, and emotionally. So it's an age of self-focus. I've said this before, that even in situations that I would call non-clinical with our young adult children, it's difficult. It's difficult for us to learn the new rules. Again, one day my child is accountable to some kind of curfew, and the next day they might be out all night, and I would have no idea. That's a dramatic step, and yet it happens virtually overnight. So, of course, children who experience that step in a drastic way are going to struggle developmentally. Young adulthood is the age of in between. There are three main markers of young adulthood: accepting responsibility for yourself, taking responsibility for yourself over things which had previously been assumed by your parents, making independent decisions, making important decisions without being influenced by your parents, and becoming financially independent, not having to rely on your parents to pay some or eventually all of your bills. Again, these are three fairly large mountains for them to climb. And in some cases, especially the first two, can be very difficult and steep for parents to climb. And so we should expect struggles and setbacks. We should expect developmental gaps. That means things that haven't been closed or accomplished previously to be exposed. Another thing I like about treatment for emerging adults, for young adults, is that oftentimes many young adults are inclined to replace the connection that they have with parents by having a significant other or life partner. That's fine. People find each other sometimes in high school or even grade school, and remain happily ever after with each other. That's fine. However, oftentimes this connecting comes at the cost of self-development, of completing some of the tasks of individuation and separation and identity. It is a very common American idea that you go fairly seamlessly at times from being your parent's child to being your partner's partner. And as we learn and understand about intimacy and development and a sense of self and identity, the first ingredient, if we were baking an intimacy pie, so to speak, the first ingredient are two whole selves, or as much as can be realized at any certain point in time. So again, it's an age of instability and an age of in between. Although emerging adults begin to display adult characteristics at 18 or 19, they don't come fully into their adulthood until much later. Like I said, give or take a couple of years, and also depending upon gender and each individual's, trajectory around the age of 25 or so. It's an age of possibilities. For an emerging adult, the future is full of possibility. For the most part, no dreams have been permanently dashed, no doors completely shut, and possibilities for happiness are still abundant. The stage of emerging adulthood can be the best opportunity for substantive change. Independence, spontaneity, and wide open possibilities become less available as young adults embrace full adulthood. One of the thoughts I have in talking about the age of possibilities also is um, understanding that for parents, there's just as much of a rule book as there is for the young adults themselves. And so as we empower the young adult, we also provide, I cannot overstate this next idea. We also provide the parents some guidelines for navigating this themselves. Some parents will ask, isn't it too late in some ways? We know that the most critical and vulnerable parts about development are in those earliest years. But the fact of the matter is, it's never too late for you to develop tools and resources to be there for your child. I love this quote by Dan Siegel. I shared it last week. Dr. Dan Siegel, a psychiatrist from UCLA, perhaps the most prominent psychiatrist in the country at this time. He said, as children develop, their brains mirror their parents' brain. In other words, the parent's own growth and development or lack of those impact the child's brain. As parents become more aware and emotionally healthy, their children reap the rewards and move towards health also. So it's never too late. It's never too late for you to develop skills and tools and resources to be helpful to your child. Even at my age, in my mid-50s today, my mother's development or lack of it, my father passed away a couple of years ago, have an impact on my life. As long as it's been since I've been relying on her financially or lived in her house, how she shows up in my life still makes a difference for the better or for the worse. Let's talk about the difference in programming between our adolescent program and our young adult. And then I'm going to get very specific about Evoke's new launch, some of our very new ideas. First of all, over 18-year-old clients have more rights and can leave the program at any time. That needs to be clear. The young adult must sign the contract themselves, and they also have the right to confidentiality. So the therapists at Evoke have to be cautious and recognize ultimately the young adult child's right for information not to get to parents. That's a part of the process that provides a challenge. But of course, we work with the young adult to get to provide safety for them, to be able to own their boundaries, but also to give us enough flexibility to be able to give information to the parents that will be helpful for the parent going forward. Young adults overall are more empowered because of their increased rights. They're still typically dependent upon their parents financially, so the parents are going to have a decent amount of input for the young adults' treatment and aftercare. Young adults have more life experience, and thus there's an urgency to get back on track even more than there is with adolescents. They themselves have that energy also. What I love about working with young adults is, just like older adolescents, is they have more insight, maturity. They actually have more matter in their brain, parts of their brain that didn't exist just a few years prior, to retain information, to carry insight with them, to be able to make decisions and anticipate the future. Of course, all of that's individually, because some have more and some have less. There's a greater deal of autonomy, even in the program. They're encouraged to take a more active role in their treatment process. Like I described earlier, the staff, the guides, and the therapists take a less of a parent-child relationship and more of a peer-to-peer. They're not at a run risk because young adults can leave at any time. Co-ed groups are present in our young adult group also at times, but not in the adolescent group. Length of stays for the young adults tend to be shorter. They're less resistant to treatment. And again, they're more and eager to get back to regular life. Visits from parents are less frequent. Oftentimes, the parents will come 3/4 of the way through the treatment process, and the young adults will often leave the program without the parents and go directly by themselves to the next program. The parents can still travel if they want, but that's more of an option, of course, with young adults. At Evoke, our young adult program includes, this is all new. This is where it gets exciting for me. Our young adult program includes adventure activities, remote base camp living, an expedition style backpacking based on our process at our oasis, up some private land that we have with accommodations with yurts, sleeping quarters, and kitchen areas, and showers and toilets. Our young adults use that as a base camp to go back toward and to launch their next expedition. It also provides us some other opportunities I'll describe in just a minute. Adventure activities occur every other week, and these include rock climbing, canyoneering, hiking, snowshoeing, rafting throughout the beautiful Southwest. So again, it's a more complex process. It's more condensed, and I'm really excited to announce that one of the new things that we're doing at a young adult program that we've never done is we're going to give them an experience, an intensive therapeutic experience like we have at our therapy intensive program. Just like our clients that come to Finding You, they're going to get to do some family of origin psychodrama. One of our right now it's Jordan Pope, but at any point it could be another person from our intensive programming staff. Excuse me. Will come to the Oasis and will guide the young adults through a Finding You process. Mindfulness, art therapy, music, family of origin psychodrama, and using psychodrama and role play to sort out what other issues or decisions are pressing in the young adult's mind. That's something we're very excited about. If you're watching this or you're live, or if you're watching it on our YouTube channel, that's always an option to watch it afterwards. Here's a sample schedule of a 4-week calendar. You'll notice that in each of these weeks, there's time at the Oasis, and then they go out for expeditions. And then they also have therapists come in, and they can have adventure activities in between, service projects, but they also will have this intensive experience, this Finding You experience throughout their process, throughout their length of stay here. We're very excited for that. Yoga, mindfulness activities at the Oasis. They'll upkeep the ground. The Oasis is a beautiful, beautiful spot. My family and I have gone out there, and we'll go out there again to spend several days out there because we just love it. It's such a sacred place. It's an ability to work on assignments and have personal time, to go on day hikes. We have a labyrinth. We have other activities that are special, like a Bodhi tree and other meditation areas at the Oasis that are wonderful. On expedition days, excuse me, there'll be morning yoga, mindfulness activities. Breakdown. We'll clear the camp and prepare to hike and set out. Oftentimes, allowing the young adults to co-lead these activities. And then adventure days, we're going to review goals for the days. We're going to prep them for the activities, and then we're going to bring in staff and do all the things that I was describing before: rappelling, mountain biking, rafting, what have you. So there can be some travel during those days too. I shared with you the sample schedule. Excuse me, I shared with you the idea that part of the schedule will be a Finding You experience. So our current intensives staff member, Jordan Pope, who's also a wonderful musician and poet, will come out and share and help them create their own music and share some of his own music. So the host arrives, they go through same thing that we do at Finding You. They go through the ice-breaking activities, the warm-ups, talking about trusting the process versus coming as you are. and then they go into their psychodramas for a couple of days. Really excited to add that to the process. At Evoke, our mission is in times of crisis or overwhelm, it's easy to lose focus and connectedness to the larger mission. Our mission is to play a supporting role in the process of someone finding themselves, their true self or their authentic self, beyond the external factors and an unfulfilling attachment to their personal history and subsequent limited view of themselves. The mission is to model being a safe container for each person and the group, such that the clients have the process, make whatever choices they're going to make. Our missions are to have clean and clear relationships with the clients. At best, all of our efforts are working in concert to create a truly safe, honest, and loving container for healing. Notice it is not mentioned that we are here to change their minds, fix their patterns, or steer their ship. Mostly it's about sitting in the ship with them for a time. This is a lot more like the kind of therapy that is practiced in outpatient settings, but the delivery method of being outdoors, of the mindfulness that it invites, of the sense of sovereignty over self that it empowers, of the sacred sense of solitude that can happen in the outdoors, on top of that more traditional therapy, is a powerful mix. I'm so glad that our young adult program is back and so excited to be participating in it myself. Let me just cover kind of the take homes for tonight. This is really about empowerment and creating an environment where the child can become more clear and connected to themselves. That's essentially what good psychotherapy is. But because of their brain development, because of where they are in life, we can definitely accomplish this with young adults in ways that are less challenging than with our younger clients. Like I said, there's a mindfulness component. Just by, psychotherapy, guys, is a form of mindfulness. I think when we think of mindfulness, we think of kind of a classic meditation, silent meditation, where somebody's sitting in the lotus position. And while mindfulness can be that, mindfulness is just about being present with what you're feeling, what you're thinking, both physically feeling, but also emotionally feeling, knowing and observing the voice that goes on inside of your head. So psychotherapy is like a talking meditation. Maybe you've heard of eating meditation or eating mindfully, or even a walking meditation. I think of psychotherapy as a talking meditation. The Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh talks about this in his audiobook, Mindfulness and Psychotherapy, a wonderful book, where he says that the act of the kind of therapy we do at Evoke, he doesn't say Evoke, of course, but the kind of therapy we do at Evoke, attachment-based therapy, it's an act of creating a safe container, a safe space where the client can bring up everything that is in them. And oftentimes what happens is we're so focused on what we should be doing, what we should be feeling, that we don't really get in touch with what we are feeling. That goes back to the idea that the triggers aren't in the way. The triggers are the way. What upsets you? What is your trauma trigger? Not just young adult in the program, but mom and dad or listener. Those are signposts to follow to find your way back home spiritually. Identifying barriers for growth. Mostly I'm talking about shame and guilt. I've said this a lot this last year, that essentially psychotherapy is taking into account the shame and guilt that prevents us from knowing our truth. I cannot tell you how profound it is to me to realize that oftentimes we mistake confusion with fear, or with it's blocked by our shame and by our guilt. And so psychotherapy is meant to kind of melt away, to address, to have some success with shame, with guilt, and with fear. And when those things can be quieted some through the process of good connected psychotherapy, the truth that's waiting to emerge can come up. This isn't the path that I wanted to live in life. I'm in a relationship that I don't want. I'm medicating myself because I'm suffering from great guilt and sadness for having disappointed or not lived up to the way that I should have been living my life according to others. Also, as with all Evoke clients, it's exploring attachment issues, including the family of origin. I joke and tease, but it's true. One of the ways that I often will get the attention of a group when I go out and visit a group in our program, in our wilderness therapy program, is I just start talking about the fallibility of parents. And the minute I started talking about imperfect parents and parents that make mistakes, you would be maybe amazed to see how attentive the young people become to what I have to say. So yes, we're going to look at family of origin issues, and parent work is still a part of it. I think the thing that separates Evoke from other programs is not just the amount of family work that we offer through broadcasts like these and all of our workshops, our ancillary programming like Finding You and Finding Connection and Finding Family, our weekend workshops, our online Finding You workshops, our vast library of podcasts and videos of these broadcasts, all of that, the books, all the readings. It's not just the amount, which is a lot, really unparalleled in this field, but it's the kind of work that we do. We're not just doing family work, we're doing a different kind of work. We can gently and lovingly challenge and encourage and teach parents to liberate themselves from the drama of the child, to live their own life. As Carl Jung says, the unlived life of a parent is the greatest burden for the child to carry. I was thinking about, I'll kind of end on this last idea in the context. I was empathizing with somebody today about how hard parenting is, how unwinnable it feels at times. And as I was thinking about that and taking stock of what historically and sometimes even recently have been great challenges and pains that I've felt as my children have struggled and suffered. I was thinking to myself, I'm in touch with that, but why is it not overwhelming me? And it came to me when I was talking to somebody. It's because I know it's my responsibility to make my life fulfilling and happy. And I don't put those emotional eggs in my child's basket because it's too heavy for them to carry. And the greatest thing I can tell you about that separation, that individuation that wilderness therapy so beautifully and naturally creates is that is the pathway or the road, the gate to greater connection and intimacy. As I taught in both of my books, healthy attachment is the exact same thing as healthy detachment. It's a balance. And so as we temporarily pull these families apart or accept the enrollment of young adults into our program out on this metaphorical literal adventure in the wilderness to find themselves, right? We create a foundation, a more secure base for healthy relationships later on. All right, I'm happy to take a couple questions if any have come in. While I'm waiting for those, let me go to upcoming events and then I'll come back to the questions at the end. My two books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are available on Amazon and Audible. I narrated The Audacity to Be You. We have a third class offering February 24th for our conscious parenting workshop. We've already had one. We filled up the second one, so this third one is filling up rapidly. February 24th. For information, contact intensives at evoketherapy.com. If you want to do a deep dive into your own work, if you want to feel and experience what I am intellectually describing for you tonight, Finding You is the place to go. Our next in-person offering is December 7th through 11th, and then again, January 18th through 22, starting in 2023. You can go to the website and find the upcoming classes or workshops. We also have an online offering, January 27th through 29th. The online versions are half the time and about a third of the cost. So if that's something that's holding you back, we started during the pandemic, and we found after the first one that a whole heck of a lot can be accomplished in those online versions. Contact intensives at evoketherapy.com. We have support groups for current and alumni wilderness families. The next one is November 23rd at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. And then for our alumni, we have one a month that is for alumni only. November 22nd at 6:30 is our next offering for our alumni of our wilderness program. We also have once a month a support group for our intensives alumni, December 13th at 6 p.m. Contact Malia at evoketherapy.com for more information. If you would like a coach, a parent coach, a life coach for an individual, or a couples coach for marriage coaching, we have coaches at Evoke that are trained in Evoke's attachment-based model. Contact coaching at evoketherapy.com. We have pursuit trips for for young adults and families. So anywhere from 3 to 30 days, anywhere in the world, custom designs for families, custom design for young adults. Think therapy light, think sober fun. Contact Sarah at evoketherapy.com to learn more about that. We ask all current parents to try 6 12-step support groups just to know what's out there. These are free. Not much is free in this world. So any combination of alanon.org, coda.org, familiesanonymous.org, or adultchildren.org. You can also go to refugerecovery.org or NAMI.org, NAMI.org, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, to get free classes and resources in your local area. All these broadcasts are available on Spotify or your favorite podcast app, anywhere where you get your podcast. Just search Finding You on Evoke Therapy Podcast, or go to soundcloud.com on your computer and find us there. You can also go to Evoke's YouTube channel and see these in video form with the slides that are up. You can find Evoke Therapy programs and me, Dr. Brad Reedy, on Twitter and Instagram using the handles at Evoke Therapy and at Dr. Brad Reedy, respectively. And you can also find Evoke Intensives on Instagram using the handle at Evoke Therapy Intensives on Facebook. You can find us by searching Evoke Therapy programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And then, of course, the Evoke Therapy blog, which Malia wonderfully curates, has new content each week. If you're at a place where you want to get back, we're nearing that end of the year for tax purposes, you want to get back to a charitable organization that helps people who can't afford therapy, or can't afford treatment. Our partners are choosementalhealth.org, sky'sthelimitfund.org, and the evokefamilyfoundation.org. My next broadcast will be November 22nd at 6:30 p.m. That'll be a live Q&A. That's okay for you to share with your family and friends. You can bring those folks into this so they can ask questions. You can send in questions in advance, or you can bring live questions from them or about them during the broadcast. That'll be next week, November 22nd at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. And of course, that's right before Thanksgiving, right before the holiday. All right. I think that's any questions. Looks like I don't have any questions that have come in. No questions. Great. Well, I hope that means that I covered and satisfied all of your needs for this evening. So thank you. On behalf of the people that love you and the people that you love, thank you for showing up. I hope this is a helpful point of contact. And thank you for being willing to do your work, because the change in you will have ripple effects on everybody that you care about and everybody that cares about you. Have a great evening, folks, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.